When respected Colorado dentist James Craig's wife, Angela, began experiencing mysterious symptoms, blurred vision, dizziness, then an unexpected collapse, no one suspected foul play. For 23 years, the Craigs seemed the picture of a loving, supportive family, raising 6 children and building a successful dental practice. But suddenly, on March 18, 2023, Angela died due to brain death. And toxicology reports exposed a horrifying twist: deadly poisons. Prosecutors alleged it was a planned murder with well-researched lethal doses. But the community and relatives couldn't really believe this. One strong reason was the motives are still unclear. Naturally, the question lingers: who really killed her and why? Most importantly, how well do we truly know the people closest to us? What if one of your dearest ones is secretly plotting a murder plan for years? Angela was more than just James's wife. She was his right-hand woman in the family business, Summerbrook Dental. She managed the office and helped with marketing, playing a huge role in making the practice successful. Their teamwork was something to admire. Stephen Tubbs, a marketing consultant who worked with them, was always impressed by how well they tagged along, like a true husband and wife dream team. But then, things took a surprising turn. Angela's health started to decline out of nowhere, and it hit everyone hard. The community was shocked, and it sent ripples of concern through the Craig family. On March 6, 2023, Angela sent Jim a text from home saying she wasn't feeling right. Her vision was blurry and she felt disoriented, almost like she was drugged. Jim, all wrapped up in his work at the dental office, rushed home to take her to the emergency room at Parker Adventist Hospital. The doctors jumped into action, running a bunch of tests, but they couldn't quite figure out what was wrong with her. While her symptoms were alarming, confusion, blurry vision, extreme tiredness, they faded a bit, and she ended up being sent home later that day. At that moment, there wasn't enough to raise any red flags for the doctors. Little did anyone know the real story was just beginning to unfold. Angela was going through a rough patch with some strange symptoms that just wouldn't quit, which meant a bunch of trips to the hospital over a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, her chats with Jim didn't seem to show any signs of stress in their relationship at all. They were still sweet-talking each other, throwing around pet names like it was nothing. Jim would text her about their little moments together, saying things like, "I love you. It was awesome just hanging out and watching a show while we snuggled." And Angela would hit back with something equally cute like, "Hey baby, I love your face." Their day-to-day seemed totally normal too, with Angela sticking to her morning workouts and Jim whipping up her usual protein shake, which had pretty much become a routine of their life together. But behind that cozy routine, there was something off. Angela's symptoms started getting way worse, and just 24 hours after being sent home, she was back in the ER. This time, they decided to keep her since her health was taking a serious nosedive. The emergency team ran all sorts of tests, but they were scratching their heads over what was happening to this seemingly healthy 43-year-old woman. As the days went by, things just kept getting worse, and the doctors still couldn't figure out what was going on. Then things took a darker turn. On March 18, 2023, Angela passed away all of a sudden. James Craig, once the picture of success, suddenly found himself under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny for the sudden death of her wife. That 2-week stretch leading up to Angela's death, full of unanswered questions and eerie unknowns, continues to intrigue everyone who knows about it. Back in March 2023, Angela was really sick and ended up in Parker Adventist Hospital. During her time there, her husband, Jim, was constantly in touch with her, juggling visits to her bedside with work and taking care of their 6 kids. The arrest warrant lays out all their text messages, showing how Jim would ran home to look after the children while worrying about Angela's worsening condition. Angela's symptoms were brutal. She was dealing with extreme headaches, nausea, dizziness, and an overwhelming tiredness. Ryan, a longtime buddy and dentist who had recently teamed up with Jim at work, and Michelle, who was a nurse, exchanged messages about Angela's condition. Jim kept them in the loop about how Angela was doing, often mentioning her symptoms and the treatments she was undergoing. But one of Jim's texts raised eyebrows. He casually said that if Angela's illness wasn't so personal, it would be a fun puzzle to work out. That line came off as pretty strange. especially considering how serious things were for Angela. 4 days into Angela's stay at the hospital, things took a turn for the worse in the first hours of the morning. Jim was right there with her when her vital signs took a fall, and that kicked off a full-on emergency response. Luckily, the doctors managed to stabilize her, and on March 14th, Angela got to go home. But here's the kicker. They still had no clue what was actually wrong with her. Not long after she got back, those symptoms came crawling back. The very next day, March 15th, Angela was back at University Hospital. Jim was there, at least at first, but he stepped out for a bit. When he came back with some food, he found himself alone in her room. And that's when things went wrong again. Angela had a seizure and her vital signs plummeted once again. The hospital staff quickly tried to stabilize her, while Jim started snapping pictures of Angela in that stressful moment and sent them to Michelle Redfern, making it clear how serious things were. But here's where it gets really weird. A few days earlier, a suspicious package had shown up at Jim's dental office, and it was labeled potassium cyanide. Allegedly, Jim had ordered it and told his staff not to open it because it was personal. But when the contents were discovered, it raised some major red flags about what was really going on. Meanwhile, Angela's health just kept getting worse, and Jim's messages to Michelle became more frantic. Michelle and Ryan rushed to the hospital, and Ryan couldn't help but notice Jim completely breaking down after chatting with the doctors. Despite all that, Ryan still had some doubts about what was actually happening with Angela. On March 18, 2023, Ryan Redfern was on his way to University Hospital, extremely worried about his friend Angela, who was clinging to life on support. While he was driving, he got this crazy call from someone at his office saying that a package with potassium cyanide had shown up at Summerbrook Dental, and it was supposedly meant for Dr. Jim Craig, Angela's husband. Ryan instantly knew this was a big deal and rushed to let a nurse know about it. He was like, "Hey, there's no way a dental office should have something like potassium cyanide." The nurse, following the rules, quickly called the Aurora police. And just like that, a serious investigation was kicking off. An officer from the homicide unit showed up at the hospital, ready to dig into things. When Ryan confronted Jim about the whole cyanide order, Jim tried to brush it off, saying the package was just a surprise ring for Angela. But Ryan wasn't buying it. He shot back that the hospital staff already knew what was really in the package. The next day, Jim sent Ryan a text, freaking out and begging him not to talk to anyone, especially the cops. He claimed that if Ryan said anything, it could mess up his family. That text raised all sorts of doubts about what Jim was up to, especially with everything going down. Later that day, Angela was taken off life support and was officially declared dead, which hit everyone pretty hard. Everyone was in shock and trying to wrap their heads around it, some even thinking it was just a tragic accident. But the investigators weren't convinced. They kept pushing forward with their investigation. And what was revealed in the investigation was more like a dark novel. Just hours after his wife Angela passed away, Jim got cuffed and charged with first-degree murder. The whole situation shocked the community in Colorado. People began to wonder if Dr. Craig, the skilled dentist and caring husband they all admired, could actually be involved in something so dark. Or was he simply an easy target in a sad and confusing story? He swore he was innocent, but the autopsy told a different story. Turned out Angela had a lethal mix of cyanide and tetrahydrozoline in her system, which is the stuff you find in eye drops. To make things even worse, toxicology reports showed she had toxic levels of arsenic in her blood, which they'd picked up during her previous hospital visits. It was clear she had gone through a lot before she died. As the cops dug deeper, they stumbled upon something pretty suspicious. Just a week before Angela got sick, Jim had created a new email account under the goofy name Jim and Waffles. And what was he up to? Researching poisons. His search history had some seriously creepy stuff in it, like how much arsenic it takes to kill someone, and videos titled Top 5 Undetectable Poisons that show no sign of foul play. It looked like he was planning something sinister for a long time, which raised a ton of donuts about his intentions and what really happened to Angela. The investigation took another twist when they found out that on the same day he was doing his creepy research, Craig had allegedly bought arsenic and had it sent to his family's mailbox. People started to think he had a plan to poison Angela, cremate her, and then just carry on with his life. Arsenic is notorious for being the perfect crime, because it's basically invisible. No blood, no weapon, and no fingerprints, making it tricky to catch even for the pros in the medical field. Dr. Jeff Lau, a toxicologist at Kaiser Permanente Hospital in San Diego, took a look at the arrest warrant and realized something fishy was going on. Angela had shown up at the hospital a couple of times, and her symptoms, nausea, vomiting, and her blood pressure going all over the place, were classic signs of arsenic poisoning. The thing about arsenic is that you can't taste or smell it, which makes it sneaky. But wait, it gets crazier. Turns out, Craig didn't just stop at arsenic. About a week after he bought that, he went ahead and ordered oleandrin, another nasty toxin from the oleander plant. It might look pretty, but it's dangerous stuff, especially for the heart. When that order didn't show up, Craig decided to step it up a notch. He went and ordered potassium cyanide from a medical supply place. Now, this stuff is one of the deadliest poisons out there. It can take someone out in just seconds because it literally suffocates your cells. Usually, you need a medical license to buy potassium cyanide, but Craig tried to play it cool and said he needed it for a complex dental procedure. But as Dr. Lau said, there's no real reason to use potassium cyanide in any dental practice. With arsenic, potassium cyanide, and oleandrin piling up, it looked like Craig was up to no good. He claimed he had perfectly valid reasons for ordering all that poison, but the detectives weren't buying it. Speaking of detectives, they started poking around Craig's motives and found something curious: another woman. Their investigation led them to a dental conference in Las Vegas where Craig met Karen Kane, an orthodontist from Austin, Texas, just a week and a half before Angela ended up in the hospital. Things heated up pretty quickly between Craig and Karen, and she even flew out to Colorado to meet him at a hotel. They used to chat from the new mail account Craig created. Sky Lazaro, the defense attorney who's dealt with a lot of cases involving poison, had some strong thoughts on this whole affair situation. She pointed out that just because someone's cheating doesn't mean they're guilty of murder. According to her, it's unlikely for Craig to kill his wife over a little fling. Now, there's Karen Kane in the mix. She knew Angela was in bad shape and stuck in the hospital, but she didn't have the whole story. In fact, she sent Craig an email expressing her worries and offering her prayers. But here's the kicker: there's no proof that Karen knew anything about Craig's shady behavior. He had even told her he'd filed for divorce and was living apart, which turned out to be a lie. Karen later made it clear that while they were close, things never went physical between them. When the whole situation blew up, Karen was quick to distance herself from any crime tied to Angela. She was heartbroken for Angela's family and was totally cooperating with the police. Meanwhile, as the investigation into Angela's death unfolded, they found some interesting stuff. Turns out, Craig's business had gone bankrupt back in 2020 after bringing in this guy, Ryan Redfern, as a partner. They racked up over $2 million in debt, and Angela had a life insurance policy worth $3.4 million, which prosecutors thought might give Craig a motive for murder. But Sky Lazaro again jumped in, saying that just because someone's in financial trouble doesn't mean they'd go off and commit murder. Many businesses pull through bankruptcy without resorting to violence, she argued. Lazaro was making a point about Jim, and Jim was basically saying that just having them isn't a crime on its own. But things got serious when the arrest papers mentioned that Jim might have spiked one of Angela's protein shakes on March 15th, the day she really took a turn for the worse. They suspected it could have been potassium cyanide. The twist? Lazaro pointed out that there wasn't any solid proof tying that poison to the shakes. Tests done at their house didn't find any arsenic or cyanide. Plus, there were those sweet texts from Jim to Angela that showed he was a loving husband, all concerned about her health. Now, Jim's story is a whole different ballgame. He insists that this whole mess was blown out of proportion. What people thought was murder was actually a suicide misunderstanding. He claimed Angela was playing a deadly game of chicken, saying she dared him to order cyanide because she was making suicidal threats. But surprisingly, Angela's family said she wasn't suicidal at all. Lazaro tossed out another idea for Jim's defense. What if he wasn't trying to hurt Angela but was actually looking to end his own life? There were some eye-opening statements from a preliminary hearing back in 2023 where Jim talked about having suicidal thoughts and wanted to use something that wouldn't leave a trace. He had a history of depression and had been to counseling before. Plus, he even confessed to Angela that he had drugged her during one of his previous suicide attempts. It's clear there's a lot of mental turmoil going on with Jim Craig, and this whole situation is way more complicated than it looks on the surface. Things got really tense when Angela texted Jim while she was feeling seriously unwell. She sent him a message saying, "I feel drugged." Jim, of course, had his own take on it. He said he got why she might think that, given their history, but he flat out denied giving her anything. The defense is trying to spin this by saying it shows Jim has been battling depression and even tried to take his own life before, kind of making him look like a victim in this whole mess. All these things basically implied that both Jim and Angela were in such a bad place that they wanted to end it all together. Either Jim was the one wanting to die, which could explain why he got those drugs in the first place, or it was Angela. Then there's the autopsy report, which throws a whole new twist into the mix. It showed that Angela's body had higher levels of cyanide while she was in the hospital. This is a big deal because it raises the terrifying possibility that Jim might have given her more poison while she was being treated. Jim Craig's defense team had brought in a toxicologist to push back against what the prosecution is saying. His lawyer, Sky Lazaro, argued that they focused too much on poison as the cause of death without really looking at other possibilities. Now, according to Dr. Jeff Leo, the toxicologist, poison is not a very perfect way to commit murder. With all the new tools and techniques in forensic science, it's pretty much a guarantee that any killer is going to get caught, which kind of shoots down the idea that this was some sneaky, undetectable crime. On a heavier note, Angela's death has left a huge hole in her family. 3 of her 6 kids are living with Jim Craig's brother right now, while the other 3 are all grown up and trying to stand on their own 2 feet. One of the older kids, Marrera, has been pretty vocal about her heartbreak on social media, sharing how tough it is to cope with losing their mom. As this case moves toward trial, it's going to be crucial to see how Jim Craig's defense stacks up against the prosecution's story. The emotional fallout for Angela's family is still very real as they try to deal with their grief, while all this legal drama unfolds. Do you think prosecution can prove its stance in the court? Or do you think the evidence they already have won't be enough? Drop your thoughts in the comment section, but don't think this is the most twisted murder mystery ever. If you want something more mind-blowing, just click on this video and watch what happened. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. See you soon.